It's Erin Anderson with the Erin Anderson Betrayal Trauma Coaching. I am super excited that you have tuned in today. Let's get talking about how to heal from betrayal trauma. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle. So glad you're here. I think that this episode is going to be one that you guys are really going to connect well with. And I think it's going to be major in helping you guys step out of trauma and maybe make the first steps into healing and progress and more of what it is you really want out of your life. At least that's my hope for you. So today we're talking about understanding your own trauma cycle and how to break it. And why that's really important is because as I've been coaching for 10 years. I've coached easily over 100 clients at this point. And one thing I've noticed is they think in cycles, okay? Remember, our brain loves predictability, like loves it. And it wants to go from point A to point B. But the problem with that is oftentimes if we just let it go from point A to point B, we find ourselves in destructive thinking habits. And those thinking habits often lead us to self-betrayal, often lead us to feeling unsafe, feeling like we can't trust again. Do any of these kind of start to sound familiar, right? And granted, I'm not saying you need to trust. Sometimes if somebody is just not showing up, that doesn't mean you have to give them all of your trust again. I think that there's different levels of trust, right? And maybe the person you love really isn't capable of holding your trust. But the problem with us wanting to trust that person again, even though they may not necessarily deserve that trust, is we know that it's necessary if we're going to continue a relationship with that person. We don't want the pain of divorce. We don't want to have the pain of separation. We don't want to have the pain of a failed marriage, because oftentimes, what does that mean about me, right? There's so many different levels of fear behind that. And so our brain takes us from point A to point B really quickly. And we tend to get into this vicious cycle that we feel like we can't ever break, okay? So if you guys remember the trauma cycle, if you don't, go back and listen to it, but I should say, go back and listen to the episode. Again, you'll have to search through. I don't remember what episode it is, but there's an episode about understanding the trauma cycle, right? Well, today I'll go back through the different pieces of the trauma cycle again. But I definitely would recommend you also listen to that episode again first. But you have the trigger, then you have the re-traumatization, you have the reaction and blame, coping and avoidance, control, trigger, re-traumatization, and so on and so on and so on, okay? That's how the trauma cycle works. And there's many things that can trigger us, okay? And basically what trigger means is you're going to have an emotion go off, okay? Such as anger, frustration, fear, worry. Those are all really good indicators, or also good signals that we need to pay attention to something, right? Like, what do we do? But too often we go straight into reaction, okay, after we're re-triggered, because something that has happened has caused us fear, anxiety, and so we react instead of give our brain and our body a chance to kind of just check in and listen to what's going on. I'm going to give you an example of the trauma cycle in my own life, okay? So for example, Now, before you guys think I'm a bad driver, I'm actually a very good driver. I've never had a ticket in my life, never once, okay? And I've been driving now for 24 years. All right. We're gonna go with that, 24 years. Um, so I've been driving a while and I've never had a ticket. But I've had 3 major car crashes, all of them very bad. The first time I drove off a cliff. First time I was ever driving, I was with my dad, drove off a cliff, landed upside down in 3 feet of water. Yeah, that was by the way, the cliff was at least 20 to 30 feet. Landed upside down, 3 feet of water. Thought I killed my dad. That was a very traumatic day. When they finally pulled my car out of the water, it had boomeranged, and yeah, it wasn't a pretty sight at all. So there was that day. 7 months later, I had a friend that pulled out in front of my mom and I when I was heading home from high school, and we T-boned her and pushed her several feet down the road because we were going 55 miles an hour, and we hit her in the driver's seat. Um, our entire front of the car was completely destroyed. Her car was completely destroyed. Um, Luckily we all walked away from that, but that was another very traumatic day for me. I thought we killed my friend, right? And then several years later, I had somebody push me out of my lane on I-15, which is the freeway. We're going 80 miles an hour, pushed me out of my lane, and the axle on my car broke as I tried to use an evasive maneuver. And because I lost complete control of the car at that moment, I spun across all lanes of traffic and hit the center divide. How I didn't get hit by another car, I don't know. I'm glad I didn't. But I had my kids with me that day, my boys, and that was also a very deeply traumatic day. I've had all of these car crashes. They are all been very severe. They've been hard on my body. I, to this day, have still pretty severe back pain from so many car crashes, right? Um, and I still feel just a bit of anxiety when I get behind the wheel. Now, granted, I had to tell my brain what to do, right? Because I could have just completely avoided driving altogether, but where would that have left me, right? I mean, we live in a day and age where I'm a mom of 6 kids. If I didn't drive, they wouldn't have the care that they need. That's important that I drive then. And these are things that I realize. So I forced myself back in the car and kept driving. But that doesn't mean that there's still not that little piece in my brain that freaks out. So the trigger for me is going to be driving, right? And that does re-traumatize me every single time I get behind a wheel. And I have to sometimes really calm myself down, especially going in for long distances, or I do refuse to drive in ugly weather. I don't like that at all because I've got all kinds of triggers going off at that point, right? Um, but I can easily re-traumatize myself by thinking about those horrible moments, right? And then I easily want to go into reaction and blame. I tense. There's your reaction, right? My heart rate speeds up. My brain is seeing all of these horrible images, like what if, what ifs, right? And I start to blame other drivers, or I'm like, you stupid idiot, why can't you drive right? I have a problem with that, to be honest with you. Okay? Um, if people don't drive well around me, I get a little ticked off and I'm sitting there like as I'm driving, okay? It's a weakness I need to work on. But from reaction and blame, we get into coping and avoidance, right? For me, I cope with it because I have to drive. I have to get back behind the wheel, right? Or I might see if somebody else can do the driving, right? Avoid it completely. And then I try to control it by maybe yelling at drivers when they're not being smart, right? Or maybe I try to control it by I don't do this, but I could like reach over and grab the steering wheel if I feel like somebody isn't being smart, right? But that can cause another really major crash. So we've got all of these things that are happening in my brain when I get in the car or I get behind the driving wheel, right? For me, that is my trauma cycle. But for you, you're probably here because you've been betrayed. And so relationships in general, especially with men, if you're a woman, um, this is a big thing that we get called into question a lot. We don't trust men because men have shown up as untrustworthy. Maybe you've been betrayed by your father or an uncle or a grandfather or a husband, right? A friend, a neighbor. And we tend to think that men are nothing but sex addicts, right? They can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. But the problem is that leads us into avoiding relationships with men in general. And they can be some of the most wonderful, beautiful relationships because uh, the relationships between men and women, if they're both a healthy person, are beautiful. Like for me, I'm a very independent person. I can figure things out. I can go out and do things. Um, if I need something repaired or fixed, yeah, I love it when my husband does those things. But I can learn how to do it and I can go out and do it if I need to, right? Absolutely, I can do it. I love having my husband change the oil in my car or take care of automobile things. But I can do it if I have to. I'm a very deeply independent person. However, I love it. I love being in the energy of the masculine. I love it when my husband is protective of me. I love it when my husband um tell like sets the rules with my family to respect me, right? I love it when my husband is deeply respectful of my needs and my wants. It's a beautiful thing to witness. And I love it when, other men respect me. I live in a fantastic community of fantastic men. And I know for a fact that any single one of them, if they ever saw me being hurt or threatened in any single way, they would stand up and say no, right? I love that. But I also love my feminine abilities to nurture, to support, bring truth to the table, right? And to create from those places. It's a beautiful harmony, two pieces of a puzzle that fit very perfectly together. When we mistrust one or the other, we are literally refusing the other half of something that's very beautiful to ourselves. And that happens when men mistrust women or women mistrust men. But we get into our heads, we get into the trauma cycle deeply when we're saying those things, okay? And again, no judgment. If you've had these experiences with men or with women, we tend to kind of follow in that line of mistrust, right? But we never stop to ask ourselves what is actually true. Not what has actually shown up for me, but what is actually true. You know, I talk to a lot of women who also feel like because God is a man, or they believe God is a man, I believe God is a man, um, that he can't be trusted either. And that's a scary place to be in, because that leaves us completely alone and so vulnerable to attacks from evil. So, how do we change our own trauma cycle? Number one, we have to understand it. It takes some time to sit back and number one, get checked in with your emotions, okay? Your emotions are literally the siren going off telling you that you've got to pay attention to this. Something is going on. We've got to pay attention. And if we can sit with that emotion for a few minutes without retriggering it, okay, without sitting there thinking about why it happened, if we just sit with the emotion, it'll burn out of our system within 90 seconds. And if you retrigger it, it might take another 90 seconds, okay? And it's okay if you really have to process something for a minute. Yeah, you might have to sit with the emotion a little longer than 90 seconds, okay? But if we don't retrigger it, it'll burn out in 90 seconds. And then sometimes we can think about like what happened. It's important to identify what the emotion is. Maybe there's several emotions: fear, anger, worry, jealousy, all really good examples of emotions that we really need to start paying attention to. We can learn a lot from them. And we ask ourselves why they are here. Okay? So we have the trigger, the re-traumatization, right? And we ask ourselves in the re-traumatization, what is the emotion I'm feeling? Let me identify it. And the question in the reaction and blame is, why is this here? So you can kind of hear that question there, can't you? Because we often ask ourselves that like just really quickly in a blip, and we blame ourselves, we blame someone else, right? But the problem with the blame is, remember, that's the adversary to ownership. Even when you blame yourself, it's not about blame. It's simply about like, okay, how can I change the situation to reflect what it is I want, right? We're going to get curious. We're going to think about things for just a minute. We're not going to react immediately. We're not going to take action immediately. And that's okay. Sometimes we need to sit back and really think about it and give our brain some time to go a little slower down this path so that way we can kind of see where we need to turn off. So we're not consistently going back to the same place over and over and over again. So we're not constantly getting re-triggered. So we do that. And then we ask, like I said, we ask ourselves, why is this here? What is this emotion here to teach me? And we can write down everything. It's here to teach me that so-and-so is a horrible person. It's here to teach me that I should never trust men again. It's here to teach me that all men are horrible, right? We can write all that down, but I want you to go deeper because eventually you'll get to an answer like, It's teaching me that I need to set a boundary, that something is being violated inside of me. What is it that's being violated? Is it my value, or is it who I am? I value who I am, right? So it's definitely still a value, but is it an outside value or is it something that's deeper inside of me? Like why am I being triggered? What is being called into question? What is being threatened here? Why do I feel threatened? Okay? And then that's actually a great question that takes us into the opposite of coping and avoidance, you know? Like, what is it I need to learn? Go deeper. Because you're neither coping with that nor are you avoiding it. You're sitting with it. You're learning from it. You're giving yourself the time to process. And then you can ask yourself the opposite of control. What can I really do? What is within my control? Can I really control this situation? Yes or no? If it's yes, okay. If I have control over the situation, how? Asking yourself really good questions anytime that you find yourself stuck in a cycle is beneficial to getting out of that cycle. Questions are really the thing that causes the interrupt in the way that we think. And oftentimes, and again, it's not necessarily your fault. Human nature is just to quickly think about something and act. Think, act, think, act, think, act, right? But we don't give ourselves enough time for the think. So when we sit back and we ask ourselves really good questions, we often can find holes in our thinking process. And those holes often lead to a completely different thought process that gets us the result that we're looking for in the first place, right? Um, so one of the things I would really suggest you do is sit down and ask yourself, well, what is my trigger? How do I find myself re-traumatized? Like, what are the emotions that come up? How do I react? Is there somebody I blame? Or people that I blame? Is there more than one? Ask yourself questions like, how do I cope with this? And is there something I'm avoiding? And am I trying to control? What are the thoughts there? Are they true? Are they truly true? Or is it possible that something else could be true? Check in with how it's making you feel. Oftentimes, if you're believing a lie, it makes you feel hopeless. It makes you feel like there's nothing you can do. But there's always something. Always. You might not be able to control another person, and I do not recommend that anyway. But there's always something you can do within your control to get you the results you're looking for, to get you happier, healthier, with relationships that show up to love and support you. You do not, at any time, have to settle for what it is you don't want. So ask yourself some questions. What does your own personal trauma cycle look like? And then ask yourself, what is the emotion? What is the emotion here to teach me? What do I really need to learn? What is the truth here? What actions can I take on the truth? What can I do because of this truth? And then ask yourself, what is it that I can truly do? What do I actually have control over? Do I have control over this thing? Yes or no? If I don't have any control over this, what do I have control over? Like, I cannot control my husband's pornography addiction. That's a great example. You don't have any control over that. What I do have control over is my home. I can decide if I allow that in. I can have control over how I'm going to react. I have control over how I'm going to view the situation. I have control over myself and my agency. I have control over how I influence, how I show up. Those are all very powerful things that help you get out of the trauma cycle. All right, my loves, I hope this is helpful. Go ahead, create your own trauma cycle. See if you can identify what your triggers are, how they're re-traumatizing you, what your reaction is, and maybe who you're blaming. How are you coping? Are you avoiding? How are you trying to control? And then ask yourself those questions on the outside. See if that can bring you some clarity. See if that can bring you some progress forward. And again, if you want some help with these specific areas, if you want help with your own trauma cycle and how to heal it and how to correct it and get out of it and break your own trauma cycle and really see what your own cycle needs to look like and how to change your own thought patterns, make sure to book that call with me right now. Go click on that link, schedule some time. Let me know how I can help, how I can show up to support you. That's what these calls are for. They're no pressure, no sells, conversations. Just me showing up to love you and help you into your next step of life. All right, my loves, from my heart to your heart, I'll see you on the other side. Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and listening in on this podcasting episode. Don't forget to tune in next week. It's gonna be awesome.